So that the 12 signs became 12 apostles, 12 disciples, 12 leaders, and also that the course of time were associated with 12 major religious revelations. We find that almost every unit that has to do with man's survival is in some way mathematically keyed to the zodiac. Now, in the old time, and even later in the mystical writings of Jacob Bernays, the arrangement of the zodiac is slightly different from what we generally use in astronomy or astrology today. We still begin, technically, the zodiac with the sign of Aries. But whereas we usually think of this as placed on the eastern angle of a horoscope, in the ancient times the sign of Aries was placed in the midheaven. In other words, it was at the highest point, and that was the point of the, we might say, the beginning of the year, the New Year's ceremony, usually occurring between the 20th and the 25th or 27th of December. At this time, the sun was born again. It rose from the dead of the old year. It began to move northward, and in moving northward with its own strange power, began to release the life locked in the earth. So the ancients considered the sun as the principal symbol of deity. No ancient person of wisdom or insight ever thought of the sun as that being, but rather the mirror of it. To the Greeks, the sun god carried a shield, and this shield was the mirror of the sun. It was not the sun, but the sun was there as a symbol of order, life, resurrection, fertility, and inwardly of the illumination of the soul. Therefore the sun became an object of worship everywhere. In Egypt, for instance, in the course of the development of the doctrine of Akhenaten, the great reformer of Egyptian mysticism, the Aton, or sun, was the supreme symbol. This symbol in the Egyptian was a ball of light surrounded by radiant rays, each of the rays ending in the symbol of the human hand. Therefore the sun was radiating in all directions, lifting up everything that came in contact with, bringing death to life out of the earth. Now this seemed to be very interesting to most ancient people. It helped them to understand something about life which otherwise was too difficult for them. The sun also, whether we realize it or not, became a symbol of deity in early Christianity. It was definitely associated with the nimbus, the halo, and the radiance around the heads of saints. It was the symbol of spiritual light manifesting through the physical light of nature. The sun as a spiritual power brought enlightenment to the inner life, releasing the individual from ignorant superstition and fear. In the outer world, the sun was the generator of life and the regenerator of everything that man depended on for survival. Without the light of the sun, he could not live. Also, therefore, that part of the world where the sun was above the horizon was the good part, the life part. Night was the dark part. Night was darkness, mystery, and death. Day was light, brightness, and wisdom. So that the life of the individual was gradually divided into these two hemispheres, the hemisphere of light and the hemisphere of darkness. Light became the symbol of growth and hope and wisdom. Darkness was a groping. Therefore darkness became an appropriate symbol of ignorance. That which was ignorant lived in darkness. That which was wise lived in light. Now, how did the ancients understand ignorance? To the common people, ignorance was lack of formal education. To the priests of the mystery, ignorance was the lack of internal realization of good. Therefore, all of the changes that take place in the world, in the seasons and in the ages, in the great processional of the equinoxes, all these things have their equivalent within the person himself. He had his solstices and his equinoxes. He had all of the different planets of the system. He had all the different zones and spheres and degrees of the zodiac within his own constitution. And out of this came the great symbol of the grand man of the universe. This was very strongly emphasized in the Kabbalah and also in the early rites of the Rosicrucians and other mystical associations in Europe. So to find that the universe was the great man and that man was the little universe gave rise to the concept of the macrocosm and the microcosm, the large world and the small world. And these two were bound together by sympathies which could not be broken. These combinations went on forever, and every creature in its own way of life, in its own little cycles, long or short, had to go through the cycle of the great year in the universe around them. Now, as Homer points out in the Cave of the Nymphs, with Aries at the top point in this cycle, then the vernal equinox at that time was said to occur in Cancer, which was the next important point. Then the summer solstice took place in Libra, and the autumnal equinox in Capricorn. Now this made the universe into a kind of temple, and it resulted in what are now known as circumambulations. In nearly all religions, including Christianity, there are certain rites of walking around an altar, or in the area around a building, or on a kind of balcony around a sacred center. And the place of circumambulation is still retained in practically all European cathedrals. But this circumambulation was really the story of the sun walking around the zodiac, going from one degree to another and bringing in each case certain basic and fundamental changes. Now in this particular phase of the matter, we find the solar mystery very much adapted to other forms of thought. In every case, practically, the supreme deity was a light deity, a deity of life, light, beauty, and truth. The opposite of this were the so-called evil spirits that lived in darkness. In India, the light spirits are called Suras, and the dark spirits are called Asuras. And light and darkness were always locked in a conflict as to which should dominate, whether light or darkness would control or rule the conduct of the individual. And of course this conflict went right into the individual himself, the light and dark parts of his own nature. The light parts were his hopes and aspirations, the dark parts were his selfishness, his aggressions, and all the negative attitudes which he permitted to flourish within himself. It was assumed that every evil thing was dark, the reason being that in darkness the evil has to represent ignorance. Nothing that is wise is dark. This has nothing to do with the appearance or physical structure of the individual, but has to do with the inner construction of his life. Wherever light rules that person, he is light. Where darkness is allowed to go uncorrected and no effort is made to improve oneself, then the darkness is there. And darkness is selfishness, it is self-centeredness, it is corruption, and it is all of the evils which have afflicted man since the beginning of his existence. So the light and dark situation now portends. And we know that every year at the winter solstice, the sun god is born. In the temples that were built in Greece, Egypt, India, China, and many other places, the symbolism of the solar system was built into the architecture, so that it was there in every case. The Temple of Solomon, the mysterious temples of India and China were all, like the Cathedral of Christianity, solar symbols. And in these solar symbols, as in the Greek mysteries, the human being himself now plays the role of the sun. In other words, the year of the sun becomes the symbol of the life of the individual. The individual, so to say, psychologically at least, is born at the winter solstice. He comes into his growth or embodiment at the vernal equinox. He attains the maximum at the parting of the ways at Libra, and he goes on into age until he reaches Capricorn. And these are 9 spokes of a wheel. And the so-called broken wheel in religious symbolism is the wheel with 9 spokes and 3 broken ones. In man, the generational structure is that the prenatal epoch consists of 9 solar months. Therefore, man is born of the broken wheel. Furthermore, of course, the ancients said that man, coming to true birth, must pass through 9 months in the womb of his mother and 3 months in the womb of the temple. In other words, the year was completed by 3 initiatory degrees by which the individual came into his own maturity. The individual was born with 3/4 of the circle. The other quarter of the circle had to be earned. And the 3 degrees of this earning have been perpetuated in most of the religious and mystical organizations of the world from the beginning. So the individual, to perfect his life, must pass through the experiences which are indicated by this solar system structure. Homer tells us, for instance, that souls coming into birth entered through the sign of Cancer, and at that time they drank of the cup of mimesime, of forgetfulness, and forgot all else but what's coming in the future. They then descended through Leo, Virgo, to Libra, and Libra was a pair of scales, and the Libra scales is the psychostatia of Egypt, the weighing of the soul. It is the dividing point between the involutionary and evolutionary march of the soul through the zodiac. Having attained this balance, and having been tested, the soul then begins to emerge from the chrysalis of its material existence. And from the time it enters Libra to the time it reaches Capricorn, it is advancing toward enlightenment. At Capricorn, it comes to the gate of exit from the body. The Cancer is the entrance to the cave. Capricorn is the exit. And therefore the cave is embodiment, incarnation, and establishment in the material universe. In Capricorn, the individual comes to the end of material existence. Therefore, we almost always represent the sign of Capricorn as an old man with a scythe walking with a tiny child that has just been born. This symbolism is derived directly from the ancient mysteries and the rites that are a part of it in very remote times. Therefore, that Capricorn, the individual, theoretically departs from this life, or under the mysteries of initiation, departs from materiality. The signs from Cancer around to Capricorn represent materiality. Here the individual has to pass through all of the labors of the Hercules, who performs 12 labors, or Sindad the sailor, who makes 12 journeys, or wherever the 12 comes into the pattern. We are dealing with the zodiac. Then when it comes to Capricorn, the individual regains his lost memory and emerges from the cave into the clear atmosphere above. Now, when you look at the zodiac in this way and you place Aries at the top, then you realize that Aquarius and Pisces are between Capricorn and the reunion with deity. These represent, and found in the old symbolism, the experiences of the consciousness in the development of its extrasensory perceptions. Aquarius becomes the symbol of the great innovation of true knowledge, the great dedication. And in astrology, it is the house of the friendship. In the mysteries, it was the symbol of universal citizenship, in which the individual now becomes a part of the universal mystery.